Welcome everyone to our webinar today, Overcoming Perfectionism, CBT Tools for Mastering the Art of Self-Acceptance. I'm really excited to be here today presenting with David Burns, and we have a lot of exciting material to cover in the next 2 hours, packed with hopefully some powerful and practical tools. We'll be sharing with you some videos, some role play demonstrations, and even including some exercises for you to do with us. And we'll take some questions at the end. And also later in the session, I'll share with you how you can take your skills even further if you like what you're learning today. So I'll start actually by welcoming and introducing David Burns. So David is my dear friend. Hi, David. Want to say
Hi.
hi? David is my dear friend and colleague, and certainly one of the most influential figures in cognitive behavioral therapy, and the creator of Team CBT, the model that we'll be sharing a lot more with you about today. He's also the author of best-selling book Feeling Good, Feeling Great, the Feeling Great app, which we'll also tell you more about today, and really the driving force behind everything that we're teaching at the Feeling Good Institute. So I'm super honored to have a chance to teach with David today. I'll also tell you just a little bit about who we are at Feeling Good Institute. Our mission is to elevate the practice of therapy so that patients can recover faster and more fully. And we train and certify therapists in Team CBT, a powerful framework developed by David. And we help therapists progress through a structured kind of 5-level certification path. And the Feeling Good Institute was founded by myself and my colleagues, Angela Crum and Maor Katz. And we all trained with David at Stanford. And back then, when we were training, the only way really to learn Team CBT was with David directly. And oftentimes it took many, many years. And so we kind of started Feeling Good Institute with this dream of helping to make David's framework, Team CBT, and tools and techniques more accessible to more therapists without compromising the quality of the training. And so everything that we do today still reflects that original intention of spreading Team CBT and helping therapists to get better. And we don't just teach Team CBT techniques, we really try hard to replicate David's training style, which is built on one idea, which is that therapists only get better through practice and feedback. And so it might surprise you to hear this, but experience alone, as shown on this slide, doesn't make therapists better. So just doing more sessions and having more years under your belt doesn't actually lead to better outcomes. But what we know actually does work is learning, practicing, getting feedback, and continuously repeating that cycle. And so that's what we emphasize in all of our trainings. And that's actually what you'll be having a bit of a chance to do today as well. And so before we jump in, I just have one kind of thought experiment kind of question for you. It's really a moment of kind of self-reflection. So we talked about how experience alone doesn't lead to better outcomes, and that real growth comes from learning and practice. So imagine what would change for you as a therapist if you had a way to continuously improve your skills kind of week after week, and would that be worth it to you to explore something like that? And so at the end of the workshop today, if you liked what we taught and if you're interested in improving your skills, we'll share with you this course that we've developed that's called the Fast Track to Team CBT Level 3, where we really help people to learn the skills of Team CBT quickly and efficiently, where it doesn't take years and years, but rather just months. And at the end of the webinar today, we'll share with all of you kind of 2 different things. We are aware that there are a lot of therapists here today, but there's also members of the general public. So David's going to share with you the awesome Feeling Great app. And then I will share with you the Fast Track course, one of our courses to help you become a better therapist. Just a brief comment about how to get your CE credit today if you're a therapist. So there is a mandatory CE survey. Make sure you're present for the whole 2-hour webinar. And at 1 o'clock today, you can complete the CE survey, which we'll put in the chat box. And then a week from today, you'll receive your CE certificate via email. And we also have a survey for the general public. So make sure you're filling out the right survey because we'd love to hear from both therapists and the general public. So here's what we're planning to cover today. These 2 learning objectives and lots more. And actually, we'll start today with a poll so that we can learn a little bit more about who you guys are and why you're attending the webinar today. So let me launch the poll, which is tell us about yourself. So our first question is, are you here to learn how to help yourself with your perfectionism and your self-critical tendencies? You can answer that with a yes or no. And then in addition, because many people are here for both, are you here to learn how to help someone else? That could be a loved one, or that could be your patients with their perfectionism and self-critical tendencies. And honestly, David and I love teaching this workshop because we're aware that all of us as human beings, or most of us, struggle with perfectionism, being hard on ourselves. And so we gather many of you are here to both learn skills to help others, but also to help yourself. So David, I'll end the poll and I'll share the results of the poll here so you can see them. So we have 74% of people are saying they are here to learn how to help themselves with their perfectionism and self-critical tendencies. So we're in good company with 74% of people wanting to learn some tools to help themselves. And then even more than that, 93% are here to learn how to help someone else with perfectionism and self-criticism. Okay, let me close the poll. And I'll cover one more slide here, and then I'll also turn things over to David so he can share more. This slide kind of covers the team CBT model. So team CBT is not a school of therapy, but rather a framework for kind of how all effective therapy works. And it's based on these kind of 4 elements. The T in team stands for testing, and that means that we use measures at the beginning and end of every session with every patient to really tune in to our patient, understand the symptoms that are coming up for them, and then also to get feedback from our patients after every session about how we're doing. We can look at how patients change from beginning to end of session, and then also how patients change over time to make sure that we're doing really good and effective therapy. And the E in team stands for empathy, and that's that we use a kind of toolbox that David's developed called the 5 Secrets of Effective Communication to really connect with all of our patients, and especially the ones that are really hard to connect with. And the testing and empathy we won't be covering today. So that's kind of part of the framework. But what we're going to be focusing on today is the A and the M, assessment of resistance. That's the idea that we assume that all patients are at least partly ambivalent about change, that there are sometimes good reasons not to change. And so we bring kind of resistance to conscious awareness, we melt it away and really boost motivation to change before we move into the M, which is methods. And we'll be sharing with you a lot of methods today, actually in a really short period of time for bringing about kind of rapid and profound and meaningful change. So we'll be sharing a lot about the A and M today. Can I turn it over to you for a little bit, David?
Yeah, the perfectionism is just one of many self-defeating beliefs that can trigger feelings of depression, anxiety, or conflict in relationships. But what many self-defeating beliefs are really, they're including perfectionism, perceived perfectionism, and the achievement addiction, and so many others they're really self-esteem equations. What they're saying is, I need substance X to feel happy and worthwhile. And then substance X could be perfectionism, I have to be perfect, or it could be achievement. My worthwhileness as a human being depends on my achievements. And I've often thought of that as a problem.
Oops, I'm sorry.
in Western civilization, the kind of Calvinist work ethic that you are what you do. And I imagine that the Eastern, Chinese and throughout Asia, that those traditions were different. But recently, both of my books, Feeling Good and Feeling Great, have been released in China, and I've been doing a lot of interviews in China in the last few weeks. And they're very excited about Team CBT. But in particular, I think that unfortunately they have that same problem with perfectionism and achievement addiction that we have here in the US, with a lot of young Chinese individuals struggling with feeling like they're not good enough, they haven't achieved enough, and experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety. And what's really cool is that finally these things are being talked about in China and receiving a lot of excitement and attention. But X could also be the approval addiction. A lot of us have the fear of disapproval, fear of criticism, and feel like if someone's criticizing me, it means I can't be happy. It means I'm not worthwhile. And then another huge one is the love addiction. I must be loved to feel happy and worthwhile. And you can find a list of 23 of these self-defeating beliefs in your handout on page 3, and you might want to just kind of circle the numbers for some of them that you can identify with. Most people find that they can identify with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 8, or even more of these self-defeating beliefs on page 3. You might
Yeah.
enjoy going through that. That list has become, I would say, almost as popular as my list of the 10 basic cognitive distortions. And so we're going to do a second poll. I'll turn it back to Jill for this poll. But some of the key beliefs in perfectionism are perfectionism perceived per se, and that's the idea that I must be perfect, as well as perceived perfectionism, which is a term I coined that has to do with the belief that you expect me to be perfect. I have to impress you with my achievements in order to be loved and cared about and respected. That's perceived perfectionism. And the achievement addiction is that you base your self-esteem on your intelligence, your accomplishments, your achievements. And then the approval addiction is very much related to perfectionism, that other people won't love and approve of me if I screw up, if I'm not, really a huge achiever, if I'm really not doing things perfectly. So let us know uh, what, if any, or many of these four key beliefs you might have.
And I'll just remind people that the poll is running and I'll end it in just a moment, but the handout packet was actually in the confirmation email that people received this morning, an hour before the webinar. So an email went out and it had the handout packet in it. And in addition, Mike has dropped the handout packet in the chat box for you guys if you'd like that. So let me end the poll here and share the results. And we can see, David, that 56% of people said they have perfectionism, 45% perceived perfectionism, 53% achievement addiction, and 56% approval addiction. So, and again, they're not mutually exclusive, right? So many people have many of these self-defeating beliefs.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, let me get rid of the poll. Okay.
Now, the cognitive model, which is really a beautiful model, and I think it's not appreciated nearly enough. The people think, oh, cognitive therapy something has something to do with thoughts, and they don't go much further with that than that. But it's a very precise model, and the way the self-defeating beliefs, SDBs, Albert Ellis called them irrational beliefs. Karen Horney talked about them in the early 1900s as well. She was a famous feminist psychiatrist. Talked about, the approval addiction and the achievement addiction. But the way it works is that the self-defeating beliefs are a part of your value system. They're always operating in the background. And but it's the combination of a self-defeating belief plus an upsetting event that triggers distorted thoughts. So, for example, let's say I have the achievement addiction and perfectionism, which is a very common combo, and I screw up in today's workshop and get some kind of hostile or sharp question that at the end, or some feedback which is kind of biting, then I need to be perfect. I need everyone's approval, but I don't get it. And that then triggers the distorted thoughts, which come up only when we're upset. And then I might be telling myself, wow, I really screwed up today. I'm a loser. And these thoughts we're going to feel about 100% true. And that's why they're so painful, because we believe them as much as the fact that there's skin on our hands. It seems obvious. We don't realize that they're just stemming from a self-defeating belief and that they're chock full of distortions. And I'd be thinking, boy, people are going to be looking down on me. I'm just not good enough, and end up with I'm a failure. And so those thoughts will then be triggering all kinds of negative feelings, such as depression, anxiety, shame, powerful feelings of shame, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of loneliness, as well as feelings of hopelessness. Now, do you want to dive into the AA,
Sure.
Jill?
Yeah, sure. So now you have a sense of, what are self-defeating beliefs and kind of how they operate. And so the A in team, we said, is the assessment of resistance. It's really the reducing resistance kind of step and boosting motivation. And so kind of overall in the team CBT model, when we're working on resistance with patients, our goal is to help our patients to feel proud of their symptoms. We don't think of resistance as what's wrong with our patients, but actually kind of what's right about our patients. If we can help them to identify kind of good reasons to hang on to their self-defeating beliefs and what they show about them that are kind of beautiful and awesome, or how they're a reflection of their values, how they work for them, then oftentimes they'll actually be in the role of arguing for change. So our goal is to become the voice of our patient's subconscious resistance. And that often opens the door to rapid change by transforming their shame. I shouldn't be so hard on myself, to actually feeling kind of proud of themselves for having, let's say, high standards or expecting great things of themselves.
And that dimension, I would say, was totally absent from early cognitive therapy. And that was why all the outcome studies with cognitive therapy, as well as every other known form of psychotherapy for depression, have only limited effectiveness, getting substantial improvement in only half of patients. And it's because half of patients will subconsciously or consciously resist. And so then the cognitive techniques, or any helpful techniques, aren't going to be very effective. So the assessment of resistance, or paradoxical agenda setting, is a dimension that I added after years of research and clinical work. And it's really the most unique and key part of Team CBT. And it's also a paradoxical technique, because it doesn't work through helping the patient, but rather persuading the patient not to change. And it's really incredibly powerful, but hard for many therapists and many patients to grasp at first, because it's so unfamiliar to the regular helping role that we think therapists are always supposed to be in.
Yeah, and so we're going to share with you actually a couple of different tools today for addressing resistance and for reducing your own resistance if you're here to work on yourself. And the first one that we're going to share with you guys is called the perfectionism cost-benefit analysis. And of course, you can do a cost-benefit analysis actually with any negative thought or feeling, but we're showing you how to do one with a self-defeating belief, the perfectionism CBA today. So if you turn to page 6 in your handout packet, and again, if people arrived late, the handout was sent to you this morning and the reminder email, and Mike has also dropped it in the chat box today. I'll also remind people that while you can't chat with audience members because it's too distracting for people, you can send a message to us in the chat box. Not that we encourage you to send us messages, but you can send questions to the host and panelists in the chat. And Mike is going to be collecting the questions. And then at the end of the webinar today, toward the end of the webinar today, we will answer your questions out loud or some of your questions. So turn to page 6 in the handout packet. And then let me turn to the next page here. So the perfectionism cost benefit analysis, we're going to encourage you to try this exercise with us right now, where you're going to list the advantages as well as the disadvantages of telling yourself, I should always try to be either like I should always be try to be perfect, or you could be more specific. I should always try to be a perfect therapist or teacher or mother, daughter, etc. So at the top of the page, it says actually that the belief you're trying to change is I should always try to be perfect. And then we want you to take a minute to try to write down what are some benefits of telling yourself I should always try to be perfect. And start with that side, and then we can always move on to the costs or the disadvantages. And something that's so important and that so many people make a mistake of is this is not the advantages or disadvantages of being perfect. I gather many of us could think of lots of great reasons to be perfect. It's the advantages and disadvantages of always trying to be perfect, right? Of putting that pressure on myself that I should be perfect.
And ask yourself, how will that belief help you emotionally, behaviorally, in terms of the quality of your work, in terms of your relationships with other peoples, and so forth. There's probably at least 10 or 20 or 30 or more overpowering advantages of perfectionism. And that's one of the reasons for resistance, is because sometimes the very thing that's the root of our horrific despair and intense negative feelings and frustrations is something that has been secretly rewarding us in many, many ways. So first in the left-hand column, list the advantages of trying to be perfect. Like, does it motivate you? What happens when you achieve something great? How do you feel? List all of those things. And then once you've listed at least 3 or 5 or more benefits of this belief, I should always try to be perfect in my therapy work, in my research, in my teaching. And then ask yourself, is there a downside? What price do I pay for that belief in terms of my emotions, my self-esteem, my relationships with other people, my work, the quality and quantity of my my productivity, and my spirituality, really, as a human being. And there's plenty of disadvantages. And we're not trying to stack the game here in favor of the advantages or disadvantages. I just want you to write down a number of advantages that click for you and a number of disadvantages that seem realistic as well.
And then what we're going to ask you to do is if you'd like to share your perfectionism cost benefit. Oh, actually, sorry. Well, we have one more step and then we'll ask for you to share. After you've listed the advantages of telling yourself I must be perfect and the disadvantages of that belief system, then you're going to take 100 points and divide them take 100 points and divide it into two, right? How many points would you give to the advantages side? How many points would you give to the disadvantages side? And it doesn't mean that you're adding up how many items, because sometimes one really powerful advantage can weigh more than several disadvantages or vice versa. So take 100 points and divide them between the two. Is it 60-40? Is it 20-80? And then once you've done that, if you'd like to share with us, and it'll just be a very brief share, you'll tell us kind of what were some advantages and what were some disadvantages, and how you rated the points. Send a note in the chat box, just I'd like to volunteer. And then Mike will call on someone to actually share we'll enable your audio and give you a chance to share with the group your perfectionism cost benefit analysis. So we're not asking you to share the details of it in the chat, but rather just put in the chat, I'd like to share mine, and then Mike can unmute you.
Well, it looks like we've got Rachel here. I'm just going to highlight Rachel. Allow to talk, and I'm just going to.
I think I've been unmuted.
There we go. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank
Good.
you.
So yeah,
So, yeah, go ahead.
if does your top of your CBA, does it just say I should always try to be perfect? Was it a perfect mother, a perfect, anything?
Yeah, so I actually did perfect therapist / parent. So I kind of was keeping it as both to try to keep the ideas in mind. So we could either pick one or do both, but I think they apply to both. And then same thing, the drawbacks or disadvantages of telling self I should always try to be the perfect therapist or parent.
Perfect. So perfect. So share with us what were some advantages? How to start with the advantages?
Okay, so for advantages, I said it pushes me to do and learn more. I also said it helps to make me a better parent or therapist by, trying to push myself to be the quote unquote perfect parent or therapist.
Yeah. So pushes me to do and learn more, kind of pushes me to be better. Is that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then another advantage, how do you feel when you score a home run, Rachel?
I feel good. Yeah, that's a good
Is
point.
that
I
a
do.
benefit?
Yes, definitely. I feel
Put
good
that
when
on the.
I've gone to something like this and I feel like I get more CEUs, or I feel good when I read a book like the Let Them Theory and I feel like, okay, this is good for my parenting and for my being a therapist. So yeah, I do feel good.
Yeah, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any disadvantages you found in that mindset?
Yeah, so I think leaning toward the idea of perfect, I think that can bring on lower self-esteem because obviously, like, I'm never going to be the perfect parent or therapist because I believe there's no such thing. And so it can lead me to feeling worse about myself. I can never really feel like I'm having an achievement or a success because yes, like these are minor successes, but I'm not going to achieve perfection. So I feel like I would never actually like fully achieve being the perfect therapist. And then kind of some like depressed negative feelings, like feeling down about myself as a parent or therapist. And also, I wrote, I may not have as good of a work life balance because if I'm like constantly trying and trying to, let's say, be a better therapist and focus so much on that, then I might not be as quote unquote good of a parent because I'm not as available because I'm focused more on being the quote unquote perfect therapist.
Those are beautiful lists. Was there anything about relationships on the advantages side or disadvantages side? For
Um,
example, on the advantages side, if you're trying to be perfect, and then you do some awesome work, some people are going to admire you.
yes, definitely. I feel, yes, I appreciate feeling admired. And even with my kids, if I'm kind of hitting home runs with spending time with them and making them, a focus. And so that feels really good. Also, a disadvantage though, if I'm spending more time on one than the other, that could be not feeling so good in my relationships.
Right, as well, perhaps, as not having a chance to experience real closeness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um, There can sometimes be a little bit of loneliness with being
Mm-hmm.
a high achiever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, how did you rate these two? Is it 50-50, 60-40, 40-60?
I actually gave, again, I think it's a piece of focusing on like the word perfectionism or perfect, but um, I gave the drawback disadvantages 60 and I gave the benefits 40 because
Great.
it just felt weighted in the like negative more than weighted in the positive.
Well, that's
But I do
awesome.
feel like I get benefits from it professionally and also personally.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analysis. Now, Jill, when you give us the 40-60, you're giving us permission to continue working with you to change this belief, and we have a lot of wonderful techniques to do that. But what would we do, Rachel or Jill, if it was the other way around, and if it was 60-40, what position would we take? What would we say to our patient or colleague or son or daughter or whatever?
Would you like to take a stab at it, Rachel?
I mean, obviously this is working for you. Like overall, you're gaining more benefit than you're losing. And so this is bigger picture working for you more, but not completely. And so should we look at the other side and figure out if there's work to be done there and some any change that you would want to make?
That was really great, except for right at the end. What's another
Mhm.
way we could bring it to conclusion, Jill?
Yeah, and Rachel, by the way, I do love what you said. But yeah, you started out strong in this idea of if the advantages are greater than the disadvantages, then this must actually be working for you more than it's hurting you. And so maybe that isn't something that we should actually try to change, right? Maybe
Mhm.
it's actually serving you well. And we do what we call sort of sitting with open hands, right? I'm not going to try to convince you to change this perfectionism. Kind of sounds like it's working for you. So is there something else you might want my help with? And then quite often the patient will kind of chase you and go, no, 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 actually, let me revise that a little bit because it actually is super painful or it's not that motivating or, but if they don't and they're in agreement that it's working more than it's costing, then kind of we don't want to push them to give it up.
And this is called sitting with open hands, and it's the key mindset in Team CBT. And it's one of the things that's hardest for therapists to accept because therapists don't want to accept that a patient might not want whatever they're marketing, according to their most recent workshop. But all the power of team comes from grasping and endorsing this idea of sitting with open hands. But this is not a game. I can remember when I was a psychiatric resident, I was walking with John Rush, who was a wonderful person. He is a famous biological psychiatrist, I think, at the Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, and he's had a very illustrious career. And he was in my class, and I remember him saying, "David, I feel so sorry for these therapists who think they have to be perfect and cure everybody." And I said, "Oh yes, John, it's so pathetic. You're absolutely right about that. There's no mileage in trying to be perfect." That's what I said to him because it seemed like the socially correct thing to say. But what I was thinking in my head was, that's okay for you, John. You shouldn't try to be perfect. But David is quite a different kettle of fish. And I am going to try to see if I can cure every one of my patients. And I was hooked on perfectionism in my clinical work and in my research. And it took me a number of years before it finally dawned on me that John was right in his wisdom and that I had fallen into a kind of a trap. But it was very, very rewarding. And so you don't want to minimize the potential power of the resistance. And if you honor that rather than try to manipulate it, you'll have much greater effectiveness as a therapist and much greater satisfaction in your clinical work.
And David, the third one, right, we were going to talk about, which is what happens if the two are equal.
Yeah, what are we going to do there, Jill or Rachel?
I'll take Rachel off the hot seat.
Yeah,
Okay,
Jill, I feel like
sure.
you have the perfect answer. No,
Yeah.
No, but first, actually, yeah, I was just going to say thank you to Rachel for
yeah,
volunteering. That was an awesome example that you walked us through, so we really appreciate that. And if
you're welcome.
Mike can take you out of the hot seat and
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
let you go back to being a participant. But thanks so much. That was
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank
yeah.
you, Rachel.
And so, what do we do if they're equal? Well, in truth, it's pretty similar to what we just said, which is I would say something like, well, I can see that there are definitely some disadvantages and that it's hurting you. And at the same time, there are some really significant benefits to this perfectionism, and it is serving you really well. And since it's so much work to actually change, perhaps it doesn't make sense for us to change that. You'd have to really convince me that it was worth it to you to change. At this point, it's looking kind of equal. So again, kind of a sitting with open hands while acknowledging that both sides are looking similar.
And as an aside, I might say that some of the techniques we teach are really well set up to be done in groups. In fact, we did this one in groups. It's just that we won't have time to talk with each of you about your analysis and brainstorm. This could go into a whole, 30 or 45-minute discussion. But this is a great tool to use in groups, whether you're, a teacher in a high school or in a college or even in a middle school. That this is a great way to connect, because just so many young people in America and in China and worldwide are struggling with perfectionism. There's so much pressure in our society for achievement and having a perfect body and a perfect this and a perfect that. This is a very painless and fun way for people to ease into this topic.
Okay, and so there are lots of methods that we have for changing self-defeating beliefs. Someone even messaged me around, can you hold on to some parts of the belief and change others, which is kind of called the semantic technique. But we're going to share with you a couple of methods for changing perfectionism in particular in just a minute. But we're going to walk through, before we do that, kind of other resistance busting tools that you can use as well. And so this kind of sequence is dealing with, again, what we call outcome resistance. It's this idea of like, would you really want to give up your perfectionism and be feeling good about yourself exactly as you are right now? And so we'll talk you through right now the magic button, the pivot question, the positive reframing, and the magic dial. But we're going to do that by first introducing you to a therapist that we did some personal work with named Amy, who was struggling with perfectionism. And so, David, you want to say a little bit about Amy, and then Amy will
Yeah.
introduce herself in this slide
Yeah.
as well.
Amy was a beloved member of our Tuesday group for, a couple of years at least, and has still a practice in the East Coast, and she's on the voluntary faculty of one of the top medical schools in the country. And she was specializing in short-term treatment of anxiety disorders. But she came to Jill and David not long ago, really in tears after having a sleepless night and days of extreme anxiety, and beating up on herself tremendously. And you'll learn more about this in just a few minutes, because she was stuck with two of her patients. And although she was doing great in her clinical practice, had a booming practice of many patients who getting, just blow away ratings and doing rapid recovery with the vast majority of her patients, she was ripping herself to shreds because of the fact that she was stuck with these two patients. And the intensity of her emotions, which you'll see in just a few minutes, was off the chart. But let's hear what Amy has to say. She's always been one of my favorite people. She's such a beautiful, down to earth, kindly person.
I guess I've always been somebody who um, really spends a lot of time thinking about my patients sort of outside of session and sort of worrying about how they're doing, and very invested um, in how they're, whether they're feeling better or not. So when I have a session where they leave feeling really good, um, I just feel great. And then especially when there's somebody that I've been working with for a while who's then feeling stuck, that just is like this weight that I carry all the time. Um, uh, you know, in the rest of my life to sort of, as I'm doing things with my family, it's still there, this weight of, there's this person I'm working with who's struggling, and I just feel that so heavily, and I'm constantly thinking about that person, and sort of what can I do differently, what haven't I thought of yet, right, what different perspective might be helpful here, what different method could I try, what might I be missing, and so I'm spending lots of time just ruminating about that, especially as I'm trying to fall asleep at night. That's just a constant sort of broken record in my head.
What is the worst part about all of this to you?
When I'm worried, thinking about my patients who aren't doing well. So I have sort of done a sort of downward arrow for myself
cool.
with that,
Yeah.
or
What if?
a what if, and uh, it sounds. I mean, I feel a little embarrassed sharing it because I realize how sort of absurd it is, but it sort of gets down to, right, what if I'm somehow responsible for them feeling so hopeless that they kill themselves, and then, like, I could never live with that guilt.
Yeah.
I guess
By the way, we
Sorry,
had some.
Oh, go ahead.
We had some beautiful comments from Michael Harmon and others, how touched they
I guess
are. I wish you were here to read that and to hear that, Amy. Also, one person said she was having trouble hearing, and I hear it here on my computer with my speakers very loud.
Right. If anyone's having difficulty, unfortunately, it's on your end, needing to either increase the volume or something. But yeah, we know everyone can hear it in general.
Right.
Yeah.
But that there you met got a glimpse of Amy's inner beauty, and as well as the intensity of her suffering. And her daily mood log that she presented us with was that being unable to sleep at night, and then the next day she saw two patients in a row who were feeling very stuck and discouraged. And she did this on paper, and this is a tool that you always want to do on paper, because when you write down your negative thoughts at a specific moment, there's tremendous illumination and learning and growth is possible. If you try to do this in your head, you won't have much luck. And I remember that's one of the first things I included in my book, Feeling Good, that came out in 1980, so I must have written that in 1978 or 1979, but it's just as true today. And you can see that she was feeling sad, 80%, anxious, worried, and nervous, 80%, guilty, remorseful, and bad, 90%, incompetent and inadequate, 100%, discouraged, 90%, and stuck, 80%. And although she's a fully functioning psychiatrist carrying a heavy load of patients and an active family life at the same time, these scores are comparable to someone if you went into the Stanford inpatient psychiatric unit and asked these estimates from somebody who's receiving electroconvulsive therapy. They wouldn't be a whole lot more severe than this. And this helps us greatly initially when working with someone to appreciate just the incredible intensity of their feelings, because otherwise you can be deceived by Amy's warmth and smile and think that she's, mildly distressed, but she's not. It's major league. And then what is causing these feelings? And this is another key point of the theory of cognitive therapy or team CBT, and that's that all of your emotions result from only one cause, and that's your thoughts. And that idea has been around since the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, in the time of the Greek philosopher Epictetus, nearly 2,000 years ago. It's not the events of our lives. It's not the fact that she has two stuck patients. That's not the cause of her distress. It's her interpretation. It's what she's telling herself. And what she's telling herself, she's saying, I'm failing my patients. And she gives that 100. I should give them their money back. She believes that one 50%. I'm not competent enough to practice psychotherapy and should find a new career. How devastating is that? And I think on that one I'm seeing 60% belief. And then I should know what to say and how to help them and how to get them unstuck and feeling hopeful. And she believes that 80%. And I should extend the session a little longer and keep going on until they feel better, and that's a 90%. And then we'll see she has a whole slew of these negative thoughts. I should extend the session a little longer, and I think you'll find this on page 5 of your handouts, and beating up on herself in a variety of ways, and then very coming down to the bottom of it. I'm too slow and compulsive to help my patients. 80%. I'm a fraud and a failure. How devastating is that? And she believes that 100%. I'm a fraud and a failure. And then if anyone sees me in this video, they'll think that I'm not a competent shrink and won't want to work with me. And she believed that one 80%. And part of the magic of the daily mood log, and what I'm in my old age, I'm getting more and more irritable and willing to show my irritation, which is probably a poor choice because everyone thinks I'm so warm all the time and friendly, and I try to be. But when I hear of therapists who don't use the daily mood log and treat people with, oh, you should go out in nature and spend time with loved ones and all this bull crap that has been known for over 2,000 years to be just garbage, you need a daily mood log to find out what the person is thinking, because we all think differently. And these are the thoughts that are causing her distress. And that's where we want to target the therapy if we hope to bring Amy relief, and hopefully rapid relief, and hopefully rapid, profound relief. So there's one of my rants for the day. I'm sure my ratings just went down considerably. But anyway, that's how I feel. But to put it in a positive light, if you look at the negative thoughts of your patients or your loved ones or yourself when you're upset, you'll see the truth about what's really going on, and you'll know exactly where to focus your therapeutic efforts. Back to you, Jill.
Sure. So now that you guys have a glimpse of kind of who Amy is, we're going to walk through a couple things we did with Amy. And so before getting to the methods, right, before kind of working on challenging and changing the beliefs that are driving Amy's distress, we first are going to address some resistance. So we showed you how you can do a perfectionism cost benefit analysis, but you also having that daily mood log in front of you after identifying the feelings and the negative thoughts. But before using any kind of change methods, we could turn to Amy and say, Amy, let's imagine that there was a magic button right here, right in front of you. And if you could press that magic button, you would instantly feel joy and self-esteem without any effort whatsoever. You know, you would feel fantastic right now in this moment. Would you press that button? And most patients say, yeah, show me the button, right? That's why I'm here. And Amy and some patients too actually had a more nuanced response, which was like, well, I'm not so sure. And that means that Amy actually understood what we were trying to say, which is there might be some good reasons for me to be so hard on myself. And so kind of we ask that magic button question, and then we kind of move to positive reframing. So in Amy's case, we'd say, yeah, maybe it isn't a great idea to just press that button and instantly feel joy and self-esteem when you've got these two stuck patients. So we can say, you know, we do have some really powerful techniques to share with you, Amy, but first let's just think a little bit. What do your thoughts and feelings show about you and your value system that's really positive and awesome? Can we talk about how some of these negative thoughts and negative emotions actually show something really beautiful about you? And can we also think for a moment about how your negative thoughts and feelings might actually be working for you, might be benefiting you? And so there are some similarities to this and the cost benefit analysis, but we're going to invite you right now to enter in the chat box, and I can read some of your responses. What do Amy's negative thoughts and feelings show about her that's really beautiful and awesome? And how do her thoughts and feelings benefit her? Do you want me to go back and show the daily mood log, David?
No, I just had a quick comment that this again is where team goes in the diametrically opposite direction of most direction that most therapists and family members would go into, is to trying to help her, to cheer her up, to get her away from these terrible negative thoughts and painful feelings. We're not doing that, because that will only trigger up resistance. So instead, we're going to become the voice of her subconscious mind, the part of her that doesn't want to change, and we're going to give a respectful voice to that and talk about all the good reasons not to change. So it's the opposite of how 99% of mental health professionals are trained.
And so I've got a couple here I'll read. Just the negative thoughts and feelings show that she cares deeply about her patients and their well-being. And I got lots of people saying that she cares so much about her clients. I also got that shows that she's very hardworking, that she's dedicated to her patients. Some of her negative emotions show the depth of her compassion and her concern. They help her know areas that she might need to work on. Shows that she greatly cares about her clients, that she's honest about how helpful or not helpful she is. Shows her high standards, shows her to be a caring and passionate person, helps her to be alert to errors that she might be making or ways that she could improve. So there's lots more here. And I also just want to point out, you can turn, let's see, wait, do we have this here? Yeah, page 7 in your handout packet is where you can see the positive reframing tool. And we have a couple examples. You guys came up with so many amazing ones, but we can share with you a couple on the slide, and you can see a few more in the page 7 in your handout packet, that her high standards motivate her. You guys hit a lot of these. Her beating up on herself shows her humility and also her honesty. I don't have to settle for mediocrity. let's see, we, in the handout packet, we have, it keeps me from being over, my feelings of inadequacy keep me from being overly confident, keeps me humble. So I'm open to what I might be missing. Anything else you want to add here, David?
No, just to say though, what a beautiful thing this is, and how beautifully you all did this exercise. And again, it's the opposite of the direction that our training takes us in, because we're supposed to diagnose mental disorders. We could say Amy has generalized anxiety disorder or obsessive compulsive personality disorder or something like that. And these diagnoses, while they have certainly some value to know the kinds of symptoms our patients struggle with and the differences between different kinds of problems that people have, they also have a tendency to trigger feelings of shame and the idea that somehow we've got to fight against these feelings and defeat them. And that's like trying to get out of one of these Chinese finger traps. The harder you try to pull against it, the tighter your fingers get trapped. And that's why in team we always go in the opposite direction and try to see realistically, not as a gimmick, what's beautiful about the patient's suffering. And you can see that for absolute slam dunk certainty in Amy's case, that she is a beautiful, gentle human being, incredibly intelligent and gifted, but with fabulous high standards. And she's a humble person. She's someone, that's one thing I always loved about her in the Tuesday group. I didn't realize just what a star she was, but I always realized that she was always smart in what she said, but she was always humble and so easy to feel close to and to connect with and to feel comfortable with. And we want to bring out that beautiful side of the patient's suffering, whatever the patient's suffering happens to be.
And you guys did an amazing job of coming up with many examples, many positives in the chat box. A couple of people said, but perfectionism is so bad for you. And that is true. But the point of this exercise is first to align with all the positives and what it shows about the patient that's beautiful and awesome. Because again, that's really where the resistance lies. Like, why would I not be able to give up my perfectionism? If I know that it's hurting me, why am I struggling to be kinder to myself? Because of all of the ways in which it's actually working for me. So after we get this good kind of hearty, true, beautiful list of all of the positives, then we can ask our patient what we call the pivot question, which is given all these benefits, all these positive values, and we kind of read them out loud to the patient authentically. Why would you want to give up your depression, your guilt, your inadequacy? Why would you want to feel good about yourself? And in that sense, the therapist is siding with the voice of the resistance, right? We're reading this list of all the beautiful and saying, yeah, why in the world would you want to give this up? It sounds like it's working for you. And then paradoxically, the patient gets in the role of arguing for change, right? Like what some of you are putting in the chat box, like, but it's hurting me and it's getting in my way and it's on my mind all the time. It's interfering in my ability to parent or to enjoy myself. I'm not sleeping well, right? And there you have the patient then really arguing for change. This is why I want to give it up. And once the patient is in the role of arguing for change, then we can say, that makes sense to me too. And so how about instead of just pushing that button and getting rid of these negative feelings altogether, could we instead work to dial down these feelings to some level that really makes sense? We can hang on to some of the benefits, but also reduce some of your distress. And then we move back to the daily mood log, and we move to the goal column on the daily mood log. We're asking, how sad would you want to feel? What's the kind of the right amount of sadness where you're not going to be suffering so much, but you're going to hold on to your humility. You're going to keep yourself on your toes. And we're going to walk through kind of each row of the emotions, asking how strong, how anxious and worried and nervous would you want to feel? Amy started at an 80 and she said that her goal was a 20. And guilty, remorseful, bad started at a 90 and she said her goal would be to bring that down to a 5. And her inadequacy and incompetence started at 100. She wanted to bring that down to a 15. She was feeling 90% discouraged. She wanted that to go down to a 5, and 80% stuck, and she wanted that to go down to a 5. And so at that point, Amy's aware that I'm not just trying to make myself feel better and get rid of everything willy-nilly, but like I actually understand that this is kind of the right level of sadness or anxiety where I can hang on to some of my values, but also experience a lot less distress. And
Yeah,
then
she
we
can
kind of
she
ready
can see that yeah, I want to feel 25% sad. I don't want to feel 0% sad when I have two stuck patients. And so it's such a beautiful thing. And I would say that Freud spent his career trying to understand resistance and trying to develop a technique to analyze and reduce resistance. And he came up with 5 days a week on the analyst's couch, free associating. But I don't, the Freudian formulations to resistance are interesting and kind of a tremendous intellectual achievement, but I'm not aware of them, being very helpful. And again, I hate to say this because it sounds critical and people will probably bust me for saying it, but what we've developed is a method for dealing with resistance in a therapy session in 30 minutes rather than many years. And so the patient can let go. And the paradox is that the very moment the patient really sees the beauty in his or her symptoms, which is not the Freudian view of resistance at all. This is radically different way of looking at it. The moment they get that, then rapid and dramatic recovery is just a stone's throw away, and that's a paradox. And the paradox is that when the therapist, this is called the death of the therapist's helping self. That's one of the 4 deaths of the self in Team CBT. And the moment you let go of that and see the world through the patient's eyes and see why the patient has all of these symptoms in a positive and caring way, it melts away the resistance. And then the patient becomes a partner when we come to methods, and we can generally blow the negative thoughts out of the water very quickly.
And someone, oftentimes people ask this, so I'll answer this question now. Well, in Amy's case, when we offered that magic button, she said, I'm not sure. And then we kind of explored the resistance. But if someone answers yes, show me the button, then we still do exactly the same sequence. We say, yes, I'd love that for you too. I can totally understand why you'd want to feel no longer depressed and anxious. But before we do that, I'd like to invite you to think with me a little bit about how these might be serving you well. So we still go to positive reframing. So whether they want to push the button or they're skeptical about the button, it doesn't matter. We move into positive reframing, the pivot question, and then the magic dial. So, and David, I wouldn't get caught up with the chat while we're presenting because it's going to be very distracting. But we're going to move on now and kind of leave agenda setting or assessment of resistance, as we say, and actually share with you a whole bunch of methods right now for addressing perfectionism. So we'll start with identify and explain the distortions. We're going to show you a video of Amy doing externalization of voices. We'll do a demo of the feared fantasy, and we'll share with you some anecdotal stories about the self-disclosure technique and the experimental technique, and get through all of that and some questions in the next hour. So David, you want to talk briefly about identify and explain the distortions?
Yes, identifying the distortions has been around since I wrote Feeling Good, but I never thought of it as being very helpful to people, just kind of a fun thing to do to get the door open a little bit, but nothing major. And I would say in the last five or 10 years, I've developed the technique called Explain the Distortions. And that's where identify the distortions becomes a powerhouse healing technique, and more than just a game at seeing why a thought is distorted. And the way you do it is you ask the patient, say, I'm failing my patience, And then you ask them to identify the distortions in that thought. Well, Amy found, 8 or 9 of the distortions in that thought alone. And then you take one of them, like let's say you say this is all or nothing thinking, and you ask 3 questions of the patient. The first question is, why in general is all or nothing thinking considered distorted thinking? Why does it not map on to reality? And the answer to that is because pretty much nothing in the universe is all one way or the other way. Everything is shades of gray. Today's presentation is unlikely to be the greatest presentation in the history of the human race. That would be 100, but it's also not going to be 0. David might have irritated a few people with his somewhat challenging comments, but a lot of people might appreciate a little controversy, and a lot of people might have learned a lot and loved this presentation. So it's somewhere in between. And then the next question for Amy would be, why is, when you say I'm failing with my patients, why is the all or nothing thinking in that thought a gross distortion of reality? And the answer to that comes fairly readily. Well, because I'm doing great with nearly all of my patients, and to say I'm failing my patients is a great distortion. Sounds like all of my patients are dying and committing suicide or something, and nothing could be further from the truth. And that's the second question. And then the third question you ask and explain the distortions is, why is that unfair to you, Amy, to use that distortion? And then the answer to that might be because it's cruel to beat myself up like this because I've got 2 patients who are stuck. I would never beat up a colleague I loved and say that kind of thing to someone who was stuck with 2 patients. That type of thing. And that's called explain the distortions. And often you'll come up with a good positive thought just from that procedure, particularly if you've done the assessment of resistance effectively, and the patient has seen the beauty in their negative thoughts and feelings. And that makes it paradoxically much easier to blow away these distorted thoughts. And this is just one technique, of course. And you can also see each distortion is a different lens through which, or a window that you're looking at why the thought is screwed up. And so overgeneralization would be another way to do it. You're overgeneralizing from 2 patients to all of my patients and all of my career, and telling myself I need a new career. You see, so that's a gross overgeneralization. And that leads to another series of explain the distortions. It's another way to come up with powerful, positive thought. And the purpose is that, you see, it's the patient's belief in the negative thoughts that creates the pain. And the positive thought has to have 2 characteristics to help the patient. First of all, it has to be 100% true. Half-truths and rationalizations are just a lot of BS, and positive affirmations are worthless for the most part. But you need true positive thoughts that directly confront the negative thought. I'm failing my patients. And if the positive thought is 100% true, then the second criterion for an effective positive thought is it radically lowers the patient's belief in the thought, I'm failing my patients. I think her belief in that was 80 or 90%. And the moment the patient stops believing the thoughts, in that very moment, the patient's feelings will change. Back to you, Jill.
Yeah, no, that was beautifully explained. And so what's so cool about doing explain the distortions is it goes from being just kind of this little cerebral exercise where you circle the distortions to really getting the patient in explaining why all or nothing is a cognitive distortion, and then why their thought is an example of it, and why that thought is unreasonable or unfair or hurtful. You already get your patient starting to generate those positive thoughts, right? And so it becomes a highly kind of interactive method. And so let's just share with you guys that in that one thought I'm feeling my patients, Amy was able to identify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the cognitive distortions. And then in talking back, in basically explaining these distortions, Amy was able to generate this positive thought. In fact, I'm doing well with nearly all of my patients, but it's impossible to be perfect. And I'll always fail some of my patients, and that will always give me opportunities to get consultations when I'm stuck so that I can learn and grow. And that was a belief that she said she believed 100%, which then made that original negative thought go to 0. So that's what David was talking about, that it has to be a total truth, that new positive thought, totally believable. And it also has to bring that original negative thought to 0 or close to 0. And so let's move on from that. There's so much work we can do with identify and explain the distortions, but we're going to share with you one of the most powerful techniques I think you've developed, David, that is called externalization of voices. And I'll let you say, you want to say a little bit about it, and then maybe I can walk through the steps of it.
Well, sure. It's probably the most powerful CBT technique ever developed. It was the first technique I developed when I started going to Beck's weekly seminars, and I was trying to learn CBT for the first time. And I developed it because some of the techniques, they were all interesting, but some of them felt a bit dry and intellectual, like, examine the evidence and the experimental technique. And I wanted something that would hit people at the gut level. And I had done a lot of psychodrama in medical school, and that appealed to me, but it was kind of unregulated and kind of almost too powerful at times. And so I was trying to take the power of psychodrama and put it into a beautiful, safe method, and that became the externalization of voices. And you can model a lot of ways to crush a negative thought with externalization of voices. And especially, you can model the acceptance paradox. And acceptance, when the patient really gets it, if they get it, is the same as what the Buddha called enlightenment. And so often, a few minutes with the externalization of voices can accomplish what should be accomplished maybe with years or decades of meditation. It's not only a healing technique, but it's kind of a spiritual technique. And the way it works is you tell the patient, I'm going to become the negative you, and you're going to be the positive you. We'll be the same person. We have the same name. You're Amy and I'm Amy. And I'm going to talk to you in the second person, you. So instead of I'm failing my patients, I might say to you, Amy, you're failing your patients. And then Amy has to take the positive role and try to defeat this negative voice. And it's a very powerful and intimidating technique with tremendous healing power. And then and when you do it, you only attack the patient with their exact negative thoughts. You don't just make up mean things to say to somebody. That's not externalization of voices. But she was telling herself, I'm a fraud and a failure, so that's one I would want to attack her with in the externalization of voices. Now, when she defends herself, she has the choice of 3 strategies. One is called self-defense. And that's kind of like explain the distortions. You argue that the negative thought is distorted and it's not really consistent with the facts. And that's extremely powerful. And many people think that's all that cognitive therapy amounts to. And they're really wrong in that belief. But it's certainly a tool. But if it's your only tool, you're not going to get very far. Self-defense is weaving in at the same time accepting a part of the negative thought. finding the truth in it with a sense of peace or even humor. So if the negative thought is, Amy, you're failing your patients, you can say, it's heartbreaking to me that I have two people who I love and care about as patients who are stuck. And I'm definitely going to get some consultations and see if there's some way I can get them unstuck. But the idea that I'm, failing my patients is just grossly unfair and grossly untrue. In fact, I'm doing beautiful work with nearly all of my patients, and even the two who I'm failing with give me perfect ratings on empathy every session, and they always tell me how much it means to them to be coming to the therapy. And then the third one is called the counterattack technique. And this is the newest dimension of the externalization of voices, and an extraordinarily valuable dimension. And you point out to the negative self that's attacking you, and you say, my real problem, friend, is not that I'm failing two of my patients. Not at all. I have another problem far greater than that, and that's listening to your constant BS, beating up on me and telling me that I'm not good enough. That's the whole key to my problem. And so this is really kind of a radical implementation in a dramatic format of the basic key of cognitive therapy. It's not the circumstances of our life, but these distorted thoughts that cause our suffering. It's not that Amy has two patients she's stuck with. That has no negative effect on her at all. In fact, it could even be a source of joy because it can tell her, hey, it's time to talk to some experts and learn some new techniques. But her despair results from her interpretation of that I'm a fraud, I'm a failure, I need a new career. Those thoughts are devastating.
And so in externalization of voices, the therapist is going to play the role of, let's say, negative Amy, and the patient is going to play the role of positive Amy if we're going to hit the patient with our negative thoughts. And these are three options the patient has for how to respond to the negative thoughts. And oftentimes a combination of those three is what's needed. And so if the patient is responding with purely self-defense, only kind of justifying themselves, and they're not winning huge, then the therapist could suggest maybe adding some self-acceptance, or the therapist could even model adding some self-acceptance. If the patient is mostly accepting it, you're right, I really am so far from perfect and I make mistakes all the time, but without any kind of self-defense or, suggesting that some of that is distorted or untrue, you can add some self-defense to the response to strengthen it. And sometimes patients, we say here, need a little more spice, a little oomph, and that is what the counterattack can be really helpful for. And so these are all just different ways of responding within the role play. So we start out externalization of voices by making sure the patient understands we're not just hurling insults at them. We're asking, what role am I in and what role are you in? So we can start by just saying, what's my name? And in this case, the patient would say, you're negative Amy, right? Right. And what's your name? And Amy would say, I'm positive Amy. And we need to make sure we both have the same name. And again, that's to avoid Amy or my patient from thinking that I, therapist, am just being insulting to them, right? And then we'll do one exchange. So I would hit Amy with that negative thought, you're a fraud and a failure. And then Amy would respond, using any of these strategies that we've just talked about. And then we'll kind of pause. We don't just keep going back and forth and say, great, Amy, who won that exchange? Was that kind of me, negative Amy, or you, positive Amy? And then let's say she says, I won. I would say, well, is it small or big? And she can answer. And if she says big, I can say big or huge. The goal is that we're trying to get the patient to huge. We're not trying to eke out a little win. We're trying to get the patient to kind of completely crush or annihilate that negative thought. And quite often the patient will start with maybe a big or a small win. And we can ask them if they want to try it out again, or if they want to do a role reversal. And that's where we, as the therapist, can kind of change roles, and the patient can then be negative Amy and I can be kind of positive Amy, and model for Amy maybe some piece of the response that was missing. And the point is, we'll keep doing role reversals back and forth until Amy or the patient gets to huge, right? It's not that I, the therapist, have to be really good at my cognitive therapy tools. It's that ultimately my patient has to internalize whatever it is that's been super helpful so that my patient can really crush the negative thoughts. And so we have a video here of Amy and us doing externalization of voices. So should we go ahead and play the video, David?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, let's see what we're going to see.
Let's just see if there's any weak spots for you right now, Amy. Would you be willing to do that? And Jill and David will be tag team, and we'll be the negative Amy and attack you with some of this stuff and see if you can defeat us.
That sounds good. Yeah.
You know, Amy, you're stuck with a couple of your patients I've heard through the grapevine. Of course, I'm the negative Amy. I'm you talking to you. But I just want to know that you should have figured this out by yourself already without having to get consultation or help.
It would have been great if I'd figured that out by myself, but it's actually a wonderful thing that I can seek out some assistance from other people, and that I'm not actually all alone in having to figure everything out. I love that it's actually an opportunity to connect with my colleagues and learn new things. And so, yeah, you know what? It's just totally not helpful when you tell me I should have already figured it out. So bug off. I'm gonna go seek some help.
Okay, who won?
I won that.
Big or small?
I felt like that was huge.
Huge. Awesome. Your turn, Jill.
Yeah, but Amy, you should be able to help every patient all the time.
Again, it would be wonderful if I could instantly help every patient every time. But you know what? My problem isn't actually that I'm not able to help every patient every time. That can be, again, dealt with by seeking help. The problem is that I've been listening to you, and that's when I get really stuck. So, yeah, again, bug off.
And who won that? You or me?
I won that.
Was that
And
big or
that was
small?
huge. That
That
was
was
huge.
huge too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, my
Back to
turn,
you, David.
Amy. Yeah, sure. I'm the negative Amy again, and I just want to point out that this is a foolish thing, making this video, because your patients will see this and they'll say, I don't want to work with her. I want to find a competent psychiatrist to work with.
um, uh, let me think about that one. Um, First, let me just say, once again, this input that you're giving me is just not helpful. So, once again, bug off. I'm actually having fun doing this video, and if some patients decide they don't want to see me, that's fine. I actually uh, feel bad when I have to turn people away because I'm too busy. And so, yeah, not helpful
Okay.
input. Yeah.
Okay, so who won?
I won that.
Big or small?
I think it came around to huge. I felt a little stuck initially, but yeah.
Let's just see if there's any weak.
Sorry, let me just progress to the next slide so it doesn't start over. Okay. David, did you want to make any comments before we talk about feared fantasy?
Well, I thought that was beautiful. And one thing you're looking for when you're doing externalization of voices is the body language and as well as the words. And you can see in that video, we had done quite a bit of work with her by the time we shot that video, and she was pretty much knocking it out of the park. She was not perturbed. And that's a huge change that we're looking for. And that's not only you can think as complete recovery, whatever that means, but also some enlightenment mixed in. Now, one can push it even to a higher level, if you like, and the feared fantasy is another very powerful technique I created that's designed to help patients confront their worst fears when they can't confront it in reality. You can create a fantasy for them to confront their worst fears. And often people with perfectionism, and including Amy, are having perceived perfectionism. And that's the idea that others won't love me or accept me if I'm flawed or if I make mistakes or if I'm not perfect. And when you do the feared fantasy, you explain to the patient. Someone asked about teaching the 3 strategies to the patient on externalization of voices. And yes, we do teach while we're doing therapy. There's a learning process as well as the therapeutic process. But in feared fantasy, you invite the patient to enter an Alice in Wonderland nightmare world where their worst fears are actually going to come true. So, for example, if they're afraid of disapproval, they're going to go into a world where suddenly everyone is disapproving of them. But in addition, not only do people have all these negative thoughts about you that you're afraid they're going to have, they get right up in your face and they say them to you. And this allows you to face the thing you've feared the most, often since you were a child. And when you do it, you suddenly discover that the monster has no teeth. And you can read more about this on page 10 of your handout, but we'll demonstrate it now.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that, right, so whereas the externalization of voices, I think, is really helpful for essentially all kinds of negative thoughts, the feared fantasy is especially helpful for worries about other people judging you, right? So this is going to be a really good method if you have patients with perfectionism or social anxiety or other kinds of things where they're really worried about negative evaluation from the outside. And the feared fantasy, not only can we use this for perfectionism and social anxiety, but for really any kind of self-defeating belief. That's a self-esteem equation. So I must be perfect in order to be worthwhile, or I must be perfect in order for others to love me. And essentially the roles then in the feared fantasy is that the therapist is going to play the role of someone who enacts that self-defeating belief. So in this case, David is going to be the therapist, and he's going to play the role of someone who's totally perfect and has achieved a tremendous amount, and also who looks down on people who aren't perfect, right? Because that's part of that belief system. And I'll play the role of the patient in the role play. And so David will kind of be that over the top, really highly perfectionistic and judgmental other, and I'll play myself in the role play. And I'll be trying to defeat that kind of feared fantasy monster that David will be playing. And like externalization of voices, there's a variety of ways that we can respond in kind of the patient role. And in essence, my role as the patient is not to defend against some actual person in reality, because if someone were really being a jerk to me, I might actually just think the best move would be to walk away, right? But my goal in this feared fantasy is really to blow a hole in the idea that this is true, right? That people are more or less worthwhile when they're perfect or not perfect. So my role in the patient role is to be kind of commenting in ways that are kind of pointing out the illogic of this over the top kind of belief system. I can use things like inquiry and stroking and disarming. These are the 5 secrets of effective communication that we teach in other kinds of trainings, or the acceptance paradox. I can accept some truth in what this kind of mean perfectionistic person is saying to me. And then similar to externalization of voices, after each exchange, David, the therapist, can ask me who won. Was it me? And was it big or small or big or huge? And of course, we want the patient to get to huge to have a total victory. And if the patient gets kind of stunned or overwhelmed in this role play, you can always just do a role reversal and invite the patient to be that over the top perfectionistic person. And in fact, that can be super useful because the patient can oftentimes realize when they're in the role of being the perfectionistic critical other that it's kind of absurd, right? That no one would actually be that mean or over the top. So a lot of learning can happen regardless of which role the patient is going to be playing. So should we do our role play, David?
Yeah, and I have to say that now I'm playing a role in a movie, and I'm the evil ogre. So please remember that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do to teach a technique, and I'm not trying to be my natural self here. So give me a little slack, because I'm going to look like a mean son of a bitch.
But that's, David, what we have to do as therapists too. And we explain to our
Yeah.
patients, this is not me in the role play. Like I am being this perfectionistic, critical other that you
Yeah.
imagine in your mind, right?
Yeah.
Would be
Yeah.
kind of beating you up.
And so you can play the role of Jill. We'll
Yeah.
just assume that Jill is a therapist who's less than perfect. But hey, Jill, could I talk to you for a minute?
Yeah, sure, David. Or
You know how you were doing this workshop on how people will really love you and accept you if you're, flawed, or that you don't have to be perfect. You remember you were doing that kind of BS workshop with Burns?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've heard through the grapevine that you have a couple of patients right now who you haven't been able to help, and I don't think it's true that everyone's gonna love you. If you're screwed up like that, like I don't. I judge you, Jill, because of those 2 patients you're stuck with. I used to think you were something terrific, but now I see that I was all wrong about you.
Yeah, well, David, no, you're right. I do have 2 patients that I'm stuck with right now. And actually, I've been getting some consultation from some amazing colleagues and learning to get unstuck. I've been kind of feeling excited about the fact that there's a lot of amazing learning here. It's kind of boring when you're good at everything and don't have anything to learn. So, what is it about me, struggling with some patients here and there that's really bothering you?
Well, I heard you were some tremendous therapist at the Feeling Good Institute, and virtually always successful with everyone. I just thought that that's the way you were, and now I see that you're very flawed.
Yeah, totally. Part of the human race. I win some and I lose some, and I'm working hard to keep growing. So you don't really like flawed people? You just like to hang out with only people who are super perfect. I do know that you're an amazing therapist and teacher and trainer, and I sure imagine you have lots of things to teach. I'd love to learn from you, but is it true that you look down on all your students when you hear that they sometimes struggle a bit with their patients?
Yes, I look down on all of them, including you. And you're right at the top of the list. I judge you.
I could keep going.
So, okay. So anyway, who won? Who looked like the ass?
Right. I think I won with my humility and my interest in learning and growing. And I think the more that I questioned your belief system, the more you seemed like an ass.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's kind of a humorous technique, but it has a serious purpose, and it's to reveal to the patient something that they could never get out of real life, because it'll never happen in real life. But that even if there was some judgmental person who was going to love them less or respect them less, because they were flawed or imperfect. That's not your problem. That's the problem of the person who's doing the judging. And it can help the patient grasp this on the gut level. And this is an incredibly helpful for many patients, especially patients with social anxiety and patients who have an intense fear of disapproval or criticism or judgment from other people.
And it can look kind of brutal, but at the same time, it's actually really a fun method. And if the patient can get to that place of realizing just how over the top and ridiculous it would be for someone to be so judgmental, for them to not be perfect, it can be really kind of illuminating and again, sort of fun. And like I said, the therapist can really bring that to life, whatever their role in, right? Because the role of David being so over the top, I think highlights just how ridiculous this belief system is. But if, we role reversed and David just modeled as the therapist, like a great way of responding to the critic, that would also be helpful to the patient. And you can just kind of keep role reversing until you get to that enlightenment where this just seems absurd and where making mistakes seems very reasonable and yeah, and a positive experience. So David, we're going to move on. We have a couple more methods to cover, and then we've got some questions and some more material to share with you guys. So we've shared externalization of voices and then the feared fantasy. And then there's another method that's very often helpful for people who are really hard on themselves and kind of feel ashamed of their flaws. And that's called self-disclosure. So the idea with self-disclosure is that oftentimes when we think we need to be perfect, we're kind of hide the ways in which we're not perfect, in which we're failing. And we think we need to keep projecting this perfect essence, out into the world. And the more that we hide, the more anxious we feel. Others might see my imperfections and really look down on me and judge me. And so the problem, we realize, is not having flaws. Like David said, the problem is not being less than perfect, but the shame that I feel about my flaws. And at the same time, shame really can't exist without the secrecy, right? If I keep hiding my flaws, I'll keep feeling ashamed of them. But the opposite is true. If I were to share with people, kind of in a humble and caring and maybe even compassionate way, a little bit about my flaws or my feelings of inadequacy, I quite oftentimes will feel better. And also, one way of thinking about this is, who would you rather be friends with? Someone who projects perfection all the time, or someone who's willing to be open and humble and share some of their flaws. And so I'll just, by way of, I'll just share an example of my own personal example with you, a way to kind of show how you could use self-disclosure. And there's so many stories we have of patients using self-disclosure. But I just remember when my kids were really young, they're pretty old now, but when they were young, and I had one in kindergarten, so about 5 years old, and a 2-year-old at home, and working, etc., and getting my kids to school in the morning was quite an ordeal. Getting everybody up and ready and out the door, and you kind of drop them off at kindergarten, and moms or dads could in drop off, say, "Hey, how you doing?" And everyone kind of says, "Oh, great," and kind of moves on with their day. Well, I made it a point when people would say, "How are you doing?" especially when I had kind of a tough morning getting out the door, of saying I've been better, actually. It was a lot of work this morning. I mean, Alex was kind of throwing a bit of a temper tantrum, and I don't think I handled it well. And it was kind of all I could do to get my kids out the door this morning. But it's kind of, glad this part of my day is over and now I'm heading to work, or something just really kind of humble and open and flawed and vulnerable. And what I found was, on the days where I just said, "Oh, great," and walked on my way, I had no connection and I felt kind of crappy about myself. And on the days where I would be open and talk about my struggles, and just I hadn't handled that very well, was when I felt really close and connected to people. And when people would respond saying, "Oh my God, you're telling me this morning this happened and that happened," and I just felt like I built so much closeness and community by just being open and vulnerable. And so we can encourage our patients to do that and model it for them and role play it with them and then give it to them for homework, so that they can turn their feelings of shame into actual opportunities for connection. And David, you want to share with people a little bit about
Yeah,
the experimental
sure.
technique?
Yeah. And again, we're just hitting you with the tip of the iceberg because we have dozens and dozens of techniques to help people who are struggling with self-defeating beliefs like perfectionism or any of the others. And we're just kind of giving you a feel for it because what each person finds enlightenment by a different route. And that's what we're really trying to bring people to, enlightenment as much as recovery. And the experimental technique was one that would happen to be very helpful to a man that I worked with early in my career. He came to me because he was kind of unhappy, and he showed me his CV at the first session, and he was only about maybe 5 or 8 years older than I was, but he handed me his CV, and it was about 50 pages long with all kinds of publications and keynote addresses all over the world. And he was just this extraordinarily accomplished physician. And I'll just disguise his identity, and as I always do when I tell a story. But he told me that he was the head of two departments of medicine, two different medical divisions at the Yale Medical School, but he said that he wasn't ever really satisfied with his accomplishments. And he said, it's like I'm always out hiking and I say, oh my God, I've got to go to the top of that highest mountain. And then I got at the top and I look out at the distance, and instead of feeling an accomplishment, I see an even higher peak. And I say, oh my God, I've got to keep hiking. And I just, nothing is really rewarding to me. And that was the thing that he wanted help with. And one of his beliefs was nothing is worth doing unless I do it perfectly. And of course, that had paid off for him because he was, an extremely famous and accomplished medical professional. But the one thing that was kind of interesting was the pleasure predicting sheet. And I had him write this at the top, and I modified it a little. I called it the pleasure perfection balance sheet. And I wrote his belief at the top: nothing is worth doing unless I do it perfectly. And then I said, Bill, why don't you just schedule a bunch of activities in the next week that you could do for pleasure, learning, personal growth, or whatever, and predict how satisfying each activity will be. Write down afterwards how satisfying it turned out to be on a 0 to 100. And then also write how perfectly you did it. That way, on a 0 to 100, we can see if there's a connection between, perfection and satisfaction in your work. And you can do things you're used to doing as well as some things that you're not used to doing. And so 2 things he brought in the next week was give welcoming lecture to the new medical school class. It was one thing, and he predicted 90% because he always got extended standing ovations because he was such a charismatic public speaker. And then the other thing was to fix a broken pipe in the toilet because he'd never done anything like that, and the toilet broke at home, and he decided to fix it. And then his actual satisfaction what was from the welcoming lecture, if we can go to the next slide, was he said it was only 5% satisfying. And his perfection rating was 75%. And he had the note, I only got a 30-second standing ovation. And I said, my God, man, you got a 30-second standing ovation and you only had a 5% satisfaction. And he said, well, you see, Dr. Burns, I give lectures all around the world all the time, and I always get standing ovations. And so I time them and keep records. And last year, the students stood and cheered for 45 seconds, And this year they only cheered for 30 seconds. And I thought, my God, I'm over the hill. And then the second thing was even more interesting, fixing the broken pipe in the toilet. We'd have to go to the next slide. Yeah, he said it was 100% satisfying, but the perfection was 5%. Because he says a plumber could have fixed it in 5 minutes, but it took me nearly 10 hours. He had to keep going to the hardware store and buying, wrenches and asking for instructions. And it took him until late at night to fix that toilet, but then he became euphoric. And I said, well, here now we can see the cause of your problems. You went into the wrong profession, Bill. And it's not too late to change. You could still become a plumber, which he got had a lot of fun with that. But he really loved this pleasure perfection balance sheet. And he showed me other things like playing squash with his son, who was 12 years old. And he said, neither of us were not champion squash players, but it was 100%. I just loved it. And then I took my wife for a walk in Philadelphia in an average autumn day. And we were not champion hikers. We were just walking through the woods, and it was 100% rewarding. And he said that blew his mind, that many things that were beautifully rewarding to him weren't when he was doing things perfectly. And he'd been doing all of these things perfectly and had 50 pages of incredible accomplishments that didn't make him feel good at all. And so that was just another way of getting to enlightenment. And I looked him up just recently because I always wondered what happened to him, because I always felt so affectionate toward him after he completed his treatment. Because one thing he told me, he said, although I've published a lot, there's a book I've wanted to write that I've never had the courage to write, because I know a lot of people aren't going to want to hear what I have to say about medical care in the United States. He was an expert on delivery of medical care. And I discovered that he had died a few years back. And they said he died happily with his family, and he was in his 80s. But the obituary was just amazing, and I learned a lot about him that I didn't know. That he was revered as one of the giants of medicine in the era that he lived. He was world famous. But I also discovered something that I didn't know, and I think it happened after he worked with me, that he had consulted with Congress and with the president. And I think he was the one who brought in a lot of the Medicare and the health delivery to people who couldn't afford it, because I think he saw that there's a conflict of interest between medicine and private practice and free enterprise, and that there was too much money and not enough heart in the delivery of medical care. So I felt so proud of him for having done something that he really believed in, and something that made a fantastic impact once he decided he no longer had to be perfect.
Such a beautiful story, David. And I'll just kind of highlight that, we call this the experimental technique, because really David and this patient designed this kind of pleasure predicting balance sheet to experiment, to test the validity of the belief nothing is worth doing unless I do it perfectly, right? So it's like, try something that you do perfectly and try something. Turns out you did so far from perfectly, and realizing that actually the enjoyment and satisfaction was far greater for this patient when he did something so far from perfect.
I've had to learn the same thing myself, and this was my teacher, Obi, my cat. I won't talk about him, but I've written about him in my books, and I've talked about him a lot. And he told me, David, we don't have to be perfect, but when we love each other, it's mind-blowing. And I'll never forget my little Obi, a feral cat we adopted. But
And we just have 10 minutes left and we've got to cover a lot and also answer some questions. So I'll let you do this slide, David, and then I'll
yeah,
come.
sure. So essentially where we've been, and some of you have asked if you'll get the slides and the video, and you will. If you want access to the slides, I'm sure we can provide that. But the first step is you identify a self-defeating belief. The second step, you have to boost motivation. You can't attack self-defeating belief or distorted thoughts without boosting motivation and reducing resistance, which is what we did with Amy. And that at that point, it becomes relatively easy to crush the negative thoughts. And you saw Amy crushing the negative thoughts, not combating them, but blowing them out of the water. That's what we're looking for. That's enlightenment, not just total recovery, but it's a spiritual enlightenment. And then step 4, feel great.
And so I'm going to go to the next pieces and then we'll take your questions, Mike. That way we'll know we can do questions till the end. So I really hope that you guys learned something today and, learned some methods and some techniques and kind of a therapeutic stance as well. And I always love hearing your stories too, David. So much heart. And so if you'd like to learn more, we're going to just share a few things with you briefly, and then we'll take some questions. So if today's training sparked something for you, we'd be really excited if you wanted to join us for the Fast Track to Level 3 certification course. And this is kind of our most efficient and powerful way to help therapists learn Team CBT, quickly. And what we shared with you today was just the tip of the iceberg. And in the Fast Track course, we teach these, 50 plus CBT methods and help therapists to master them too. And I'll share with you just one testimonial. We always have people emailing us really awesome things that they learned and what they love about the Fast Track course. And this is just from Stacy, who said it was the kind of training that she wished she'd had in grad school. And so we hear things like that all the time, and it's, super rewarding for us. And there's a lot on this slide, but I will just say that the Fast Track course is packed with lots of goodies. And this slide gives you a little bit of a picture of what's included. So it starts, the next round will start on September 11th, and it's a hybrid course designed for really busy professionals. So it's 16 hours of asynchronous on-demand content. There's a 4-hour live training. David and I are going to work with a participant live, doing a David Burns live, and that's kind of our kickoff event. And then 25 weeks of small group coaching and live practice with awesome trainers and therapists. It also includes free certification, free access to the level 3 certification exam, and David's full therapist toolkit. There's a 30-day money back guarantee. So if you're not happy in the first 30 days, you can always get a refund. And then today we're offering you guys a coupon. So at the very bottom of the page, it has this coupon Skill Up 50. And yeah, so we'd love for you guys to join us and sort of learn more with us in the Fast Track course. I also want David to have a chance to tell you about the Feeling Great app, which I know is free this summer, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah, we've trained the AI to do just what I would do with you, or what Jill and I did with Amy, just to go through the TEAM steps. And we came up with a new version just recently. The old version was incredibly powerful, and the new version is even 50% more powerful, and people are reporting 60 to 70% reductions in 7 different negative feelings within the first 90 minutes on the app. And we've decided that the best things in life are free, and so it's kind of probably crazy from a business point of view, but we're just giving the app away for free now. And so we're hoping you'll try it yourself and recommend it to friends and loved ones. It'll be free at least through the summer. So you've got nothing to lose and your life to gain, the world to gain. Also, yeah, you can do the next slide. Yep.
Also, we have lots of other free opportunities for people to learn and grow. And I'll do this very quickly so we can get to some questions for the next few minutes. But we have weekly training groups David and I offer on Tuesday nights from 5 to 7 Pacific, where therapists can join for free, kind of unlimited psychotherapy training with us. And the contact info is on this slide. And as well, Wednesday mornings with Rhonda and Kai, a similar kind of free therapist training group. David does the Feeling Good podcast, and there's more than 400 episodes of free podcasts there that you can find on the Feeling Good website. And then David also has the Feeling Great YouTube channel where you can watch David's favorite stories and some trainings and videos by searching Feeling Great YouTube. And if I didn't say it, you can learn more about the Fast Track course on the Feeling Good Institute website, and we can also drop the link to that in the chat box. And as David and I are taking questions, Mike is putting the link to the continuing education survey in the chat box right now. So if you're a therapist, make sure you're doing the CE survey, not the general public survey. And if you're not a therapist and you want to give us some feedback, you can do the general public survey. But if you're a therapist, make sure you're clicking on the CE credit survey. And so now we'll take some questions.
And we'll give fast answers to these questions so
Yeah.
we get as many questions as we can.
Is a quick one. Somebody's read both Feeling Good and Feeling Good Handbook, but they're looking at reading Feeling Great. What's the difference with the new book, David?
The Feeling Great, I've been fine tuning cognitive therapy every day for the last 40, 50 years. And so it's way upgraded from Feeling Good on every level, the testing, the empathy, but the methods, all that is, very high powered now. But the main thing is the development of the elimination of resistance. That's what's led to the incredible rapid results with Team CBT, including our now totally free Feeling Great app.
How is a CBA different than doing positive reframing?
Jill, that's for you.
Sorry, I was just noticing just a question in the chat box. So how is the CBA different from positive reframing? You oftentimes cover many of the same things, but because the advantages can oftentimes be brought to life as well with the positive reframing. But I would say positive reframing is more paradoxical. The CBA, as we've done it, even though it's a bit paradoxical, it's a bit more straightforward because you're listing the disadvantages as well. Whereas positive reframing is really meant to help the patient feel proud of their symptoms.
Yeah, we've had the cost-benefit analysis since the late 1970s, but the positive reframing and the whole new procedures we use to melt away the eight most common forms of therapeutic resistance. It's much more powerful and much more comprehensive.
Can you describe more about what it means to sit with open hands?
It means to be willing to let go. Once when I was jogging, I said, well, David, what would you do if you had a patient with severe OCD who doesn't want help? And then it popped into my brain, well, I would tell them, is there something you do want help with? And just let go of some compulsion to treat somebody just because they have a diagnosis. I'm here to serve people and not to be an expert and tell you what you're supposed to do with your life or how you're supposed to be. The role of the therapist and team is very humble.
Amy said she was hesitant to press the magic button. If someone says yes, how do you proceed? What's the transition from a yes to magic button?
I would say I'm so glad that you said that, and virtually everyone says yes. No one, you've been suffering terribly, and no one wants to suffer terribly. And we don't have a magic button, but I do have some magical techniques, and it's very powerful. And I predict it probably will happen that all your negative feelings will blow them away in today's session if we use these techniques. But I don't think we should use them. At least I'm not convinced. And then the patient gets agitated and said, well, why? If you've got the techniques, I want to use them. I've had 20 years of failed therapy. You must help me. And then I say, well, before we do that, let's take a look at all these negative thoughts and feelings you have, because there may be some beautiful things about you that are hidden in them. And we might want to consider that before we move too fast to make all your negative feelings disappear. And so this is setting up a paradox right away where the patient has to convince the therapist and chase the therapist, rather than the traditional thing where the therapist tries to help and then runs into resistance.
So many other great questions we didn't get to. One last quick one, Jill. Can
Yeah.
we do CBT without team CBT? Can we do it effectively? That's a good
Well,
one.
I can answer that because I was trained in CBT from the very first day of graduate school. And then when I moved to California, I met David, and that was like 17, almost 18 years ago. And I had lots of methods that I could use for patients, but I definitely found that so many patients were resistant or reluctant. And in my opinion, Team CBT is like CBT, except it has this whole piece about empathy and connecting with patients, and this whole piece about addressing and reducing resistance. And there's so many awesome role-playing methods to bring CBT to this much more kind of emotional level. So I would say Team CBT is kind of like CBT on steroids. So you get to pick your own path.
Thanks, Jill.
Okay, and so we'll say a big thank you to everyone. It's always a total honor to present with you, David, and I so appreciate all these tools that you've developed and how much you bring them to everyone with so much heart and so much creativity. And thank you also to Mike for always being the best collaborator here in these webinars. And thanks to everyone for 2 hours of your time and attention today.
Yeah, I love you, Jill and Mike and Maor, and I love all of you for supporting us, therapists and general public, and for coming today. And if you like these free things for therapists and the general public, let us know, because we've done 2 or 3 of them now, and I hope we can keep offering you programs like this.
All right, take care, everybody. Thanks.